Before I forget, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock is a breakfast here at the library. Just for everyone who wants to. 9 o'clock, continental breakfast. There will be no training. There will be no speeches. It will just be a time to get together and chat and have coffee and eat. Please all do come back, 9 o'clock. If you're terribly late, all of the maple bars will be gone. Because there are a couple people here who are thieves, and some of the really good teaser scones will have been snarfled up. So 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and truly it's just to get together to have a good time, and you're all absolutely welcome. If you made it here tonight, you're at some level or another a library person, and that counts, absolutely. This is the concluding event in the month-long program here at the library called Orcas Reads, which is part of our lifelong learning program, co-sponsored between the Friends of the Library and the public library itself. And the Friends have been so wonderful and so generous throughout the years. This is just another example of the cooperation between the Friends and the public library. Tonight we are here to talk about this library, from its inceptions to where we are right now. It is not meant to be a chronological, year by year recitation from these 7 people, but much more people's impressions, people's remembrances, what stands out over the last 50 years in these people's minds. And so as I move through tonight, and you think, but wait, ask. Don't wait until the end to ask unless you specifically want to. If Margaret Philbrick is talking about something you think, oh yeah, that was really cool, and I remember when, raise your hand and ask, and it doesn't need to be a question, it can be remembrance of yours also. Many of you, when I look at the audience, have been involved in the library for years and years and years, and if you want to throw something in, this is your opportunity to, or if you want to ask Fred a particular question about the transition years, this is your chance to ask. I may restate your question just because the mic is here and I'm not sure how well it picks up for all of us here to the back. So do ask. You will realize quickly this is a love fest. Under the guise of an oral history. We've been talking about this for a month now, and a couple of us have been talking about this for 3 months. In the last couple of days, everybody's sort of been in and out of the library. This is truly a love fest about the private library and the public library here on Orcas in a way that is absolutely breathtaking. Our panel members tonight really run the gamut from the very first librarian to the current librarian in some interesting ways. I would like to introduce, at the far side from me, Gladys Gropper, who has volunteered at the library since 1955, was the assistant librarian for several years, and was the librarian at the Association Library from 58 through 1965. She has done book processing and mending since 1970. Every Thursday morning, Gladys Gropper and Jay Shazam will come, and to today, mend our books. Gladys at some point also worked the front desk. So Gladys is sort of one of those people who's done it all. The person next to Gladys is Margaret Philbrick, who has volunteered here at the library since 1980 through currently now. She was the librarian, she thinks, from 1984 through 1988, through that transition time. She is hazy on 84, it may have been 83, but we're calling it 84. She has also worked the front desk, she has done book selection, she was on the association board, she was involved in the Prune Alley, which was the quarterly that was put out for years and years with literary works in it. Next to Margaret is Fred Cleveland. And Fred, this is another, we're sort of great on this, he thinks he's volunteered here since 1979 through the present. Fred has worked the front desk all of those years, worked the front desk yesterday, as a matter of fact. Fred did early on the interlibrary loan process. in the early 80s for a while. He was also heavily involved in the transition years, going from a private library to a public library, was involved in the grant writing for the state library for that. Next to Fred is Rosalie Chantiny, who has volunteered at this library since 1980 through the present. She's worked the front desk. She was the Friends chairperson in 1988. She's done book selection. Years ago, we did overdues. Rosalie was one of those people who sat and mailed out the overdue, I didn't know that either, mailed out overdue notices to all of us wayward book buyers. She's done displays and exhibits. She has written for us. She does book talks on gardening books all over the island. She also worked on the bookworm before it was what we now know as the bookworm, the first creation of the bookworm. Next to Rosalie is Carol Cotton, who has been involved in the library volunteering since 1985 through the present. She was on the association board when it was a private library. This is her second go-around on the library district board. Carol was on the very first board when we went public for 5 years, took some time off, and is back now on the district board, and this year is chairperson of the district board. Let's see, she's also done interlibrary loan. And we all think of Carol as the person at the library fair for years and years and years who counts the money. Next to Carol is Victoria Parker. I love this, who is the newcomer to the group. Yes. Victoria came in 1988, and Victoria is the first librarian here at the public library. As we made that transition from private to public, Victoria was our first librarian and our only librarian.
Lucky me.
So,
lucky us.
And then sitting right next to me is Kate Adams, and this is a jump since I didn't want to sit right next to my boss. I should have done some juggling in this. Kate has volunteered at the library since 1978 through right now. She has done magazines, she's done displays, she's done gardening, she's done book processing. She has been intricately involved in most of the events that have happened here. I sort of think of her as the library's Martha Stewart. And Kate is the person when you absolutely need something, you can just call her and say, Kate, and it's always sure. I'm Phyllis Carney, and I'm going to moderate tonight and ask questions. I joined the library staff in 1988, the same year Victoria did, as the first children's librarian in the public library. There were many other children's librarians in the private library. And John Gorton from West Sound Video is taping tonight, and this is John. And if you haven't had a chance to look at all of his fun equipment, when we stop for coffee and cookies, please talk with John. But this tonight is really designed to be a history of this library on Orcas. Do feel free to ask questions. And we're going to start with Gladys as the first librarian in the library.
Question. I would just like to say that I have been a volunteer since about 1980.
Don't you think, Goody? This is pretty good, Rich, and that's an interesting question. Raise your hand if you're a library volunteer one way or the other right now, or have been in the past.
There you go. That's why it's such a neat library.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing. This is sort of like the preaching to the choir this evening. Gladys is going to give us a brief rounding history of those first years of the private library. Gladys, when we first started, what was the name of the library?
When we first got property on which to put our building, it came from Mrs. Fred Myers, who owned the property, of course, and also owned Outlook Inn at that time. She gave us the lot on which to build our building with the understanding that the name of the library would be the Fred P. Myers Memorial Library. And that was the formal name under which we worked those years. In 1954, a group of islanders met together and started the first plans to build the building on this lot, which had been presented to us. I believe the book shows about 35 names, 35 charter members. And they chose the name Orcas Island Library Association. And that was the name under which the library operated. Their articles of government and the official papers that they did all had to be under this type of a name. So that's why you will hear tonight a difference, or a time difference, in the library's history of the association years and the public years. The original building was 30 by 40 feet, and 10 feet were taken off of one end of the building for storage and for hopefully when we got really well launched, we would also have a restroom there. Well, there was only hope at that time, believe me. The building, in case you don't know, is across from the Episcopal Church, and it's now called Windermere Real Estate. Almost lost what it's called. On opening day, this one room had 3 nice windows on the roadside and 3 nice on the opposite side, and it was just otherwise, to all intents and purposes, an empty room. Had a beautiful floor of gray and maroon linoleum tile. The ceiling was taped and sanded drywall. The lights hung down, each one on a cord with a light bulb. Acoustic tile and lighting fixtures were added 2 years later. Shelves were started but not completed, and in each corner there were boxes of books. These boxes, this is a long told story, but over at least 10 years they had been collected and were stored in people's attics and in people's spare bedroom, and all around the island these boxes of books were stored. And on this opening day they had all been brought. What would fit was in the storage room, and I remember clearly walking in there, and there was just walkway, and books and boxes were stacked knee-high in the storage room, and more of them overflowing into our opening day. Now, 1 month later, there was a grand opening, and by this time we had enough shelves, and we had some books on all of the shelves. One piece of furniture was to the left of the opening doors we went in, and it was a desk that was on loan from our longtime friend Dot Bowles, and that was our checkout desk. I've tried real hard to remember. I think there must have been a chair behind that desk, but I can't promise it. That was our furniture for our first 3, 4, or 5 years. In about 2 years, we had sorted and had book cards and had started a catalog, so we needed additional book storage. Books, numbers of books were never a problem. One article at opening day from the then Sounder said the library could probably own 4,000 books. Now, I don't think we got 100 of them on the shelves for opening day, but maybe 300 by grand opening. In the next 5 years, we advanced to the place where we needed islands. The then librarian's husband was drafted to build our first 4 islands, and I think there's possibly 8 by the time we had our first edition. Toss that in just to say we started out very small, but we got bigger quickly.
Gladys, when was the first opening day? When was the grand opening?
The grand opening was July the 8th. The opening day, the day we just opened because we were so anxious we couldn't wait any longer, was June the 1st. So in a month we finally got windows washed and and they finished the shelves and we got a few more books.
And what year?
The same year, just 1 month later.
But what year was that?
Oh, sure, why not? 1956. Leave out the most important.
Right, I know.
Now, my notes say to stop here.
No. As we go through the evening, we're going to do some questions about the Association Library first, because it came first. And I'm curious, and this is really, including Kate jumping around, but for you, well, except for Victoria and I.
Well, I want to ask Gladys, were those books in those boxes donations from people who read? And how about the lady from Frederick and Nelson who sent some to be?
Well, I suppose I'm jumping too quickly because this story has been told so much. I probably should start right now and say the B. Cook story has been told so often that I don't think I need to go into detail, but B. Cook was the person who lit the fire under the community and said, now come on, let's get going, let's do this. And she got books. She had friends who worked in many bookstores.
Oh,
And they come to the head of a bookstore and all of these samples come free and these are not going to be kept, so they're passed on to. So Bee started bringing to her home over on West Beach. She started every summer when they came, she brought a carload of books, and the next time they came, another carload. So this is where the boxes of books came, and Bee built up those boxes. She had one really good friend, and you say Frederick's. I didn't know which store, Sally Ford.
that's all I remember.
Really, who was in a position to get more modern books, more usable books, and in her generous way said, well, we'll put a stamp in that says Sally Poliart Library.
Yeah. Okay.
So we would find books in our, what do I call it, our antique shelf, or occasionally a longtime safe with Sally Poliart. That's part of the boxes that came. The most books, the interesting books, were the ones that came from all around the island and from our summer people who learned that we were struggling to get our library started. And these people cleaned out their shelves at home and brought us, I can remember the day they walked in, well, they didn't exactly walk in, but they wheeled in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And somebody else brought us a yearbook, World Encyclopedia, right? And people were so amazingly generous. Once this nucleus of hard workers got together and got started, books were never a problem. I think that was in my sense. And I went through the financial records of my first 8 years there, and it was 3 years before we ever bought a book. Of course, we didn't have money to buy books to begin with. We paid our power and light bill, and we bought what supplies we had to have, and we couldn't check out books without book cards, so we had to, certain supplies we had to have, and our power and light bill had to be paid. And we just lived, so to speak, from hand to mouth for 2 years. And then it began to grow a little faster, got a little better. But that's where the books came from. Everywhere is the answer, I think.
Well, now the funds that you operated on, even back then, was that from membership dues or just donations?
Our membership, as long as I was there, our membership was $5, $5 a year. Lifetime membership was $25, and they sold a lot of those in their building funds in order to get the funds together to do the building. Hobby shows, potluck dinners, pie socials. Two people worked together. They came kind of, run together and they had the same thing planned for the same night, 2 different causes. So they combined their plans, and the library got $47, and this other place, which I can't say this minute, got $47. And that's how we worked. We didn't work by $50, we worked more by 20.
Gladys and Margaret, when you were librarians in the association, how was the library operated? How were the decisions made? Was there a board? How did this work?
We had a board, I think, yes. A board of people, all volunteers, and they divvied up the jobs of things to kind of ride herd on. And so I can remember Ralph Finnerty being treasurer, and I remember Raleigh Reed being the president of the board at one stage of the game, and there was Dick Glidden, and there was John Conley, and there was lots of people. Jim Quigley, and the boys, yeah, and Bob Cook, of course.
Bob Cook at the.
How was the board selected?
Well, I think you volunteered, and if the rest of the people said, oh, that'd be great, he'll do so-and-so, and then you got on.
That was before the Friends was organized.
That's right,
Yeah.
there was no, we didn't have a Friends organization at that point.
Everything was the association.
Everything and everybody pitched in and
Did the association meet, the board, did it meet monthly,
Yes.
quarterly? How did it?
once a month. And I remember a time when it had been a big board and they thought, well, this is too unwieldy, we'll go back down to about 7 people on the board. And all of a sudden, there weren't enough bodies to take care of the jobs. And so we went back up to a 14-man board, I think it was 14. And because there were so many things to do when it was all volunteer,
Was the board involved in the day-to-day operation of the library?
to a certain extent, because by that time, they were beginning to make decisions about what kind of books to buy. And so then the book selection committee used to be almost a free-for-all. People would come with little things they'd snipped out of the newspaper or magazines and then they'd have to fight for getting their book on the list.
Is that ring true to you, Gladys, at the beginning? Was it that same?
When I was librarian, the board and its officers ran the library, and they told me what to do, and I did it. And here was the money.
And take $10 and go spend it.
Yes. And I would say, boy, I sure would like some help with the housekeeping. Can we get this person who does can we get them to come once a month and clean books and wash windows and clean floors? Well, I'm sorry, but there isn't any money for that. Can't do that, Gladys. Now, we'll find you some volunteers. And so the board went and found it. I didn't do it. I said this needed to be done, and they did it. As we talk, it comes to me that the trustees were what the Friends of the Library is now. They did it all. I just did what they told me to.
When you started as librarian, were you paid or were you a volunteer also?
Oh, I was a volunteer. I was not paid.
Margaret, when you were the librarian, were you paid?
No,
You were volunteer also.
right. Everybody was
Was
in the
everyone
association.
in the association?
Yes.
Was
Well-
everyone?
Well, we did, I'm sorry, we hired a secretary when Kathy Lloyd was the first time, I think, Kathy was the first one that we ever hired to do secretarial work. And that's, you see, that's up into the 80s.
That's much later.
And then You see, I thought you were the first one that I hired, but I've been set straight. I was sure that I was the reason why we got you.
You are the reason.
I felt that was the smartest thing we ever did.
I was not paid, but Maud Louise Strayer, who followed me as librarian,
Okay.
said, I would love to do this work and I love to serve the community, but I live on a strict retirement income and I can't do it unless you pay me mileage for my car to come to the library 3 days a week. And I think,
Okay.
I can be corrected on this quickly, but I think that this basic mileage thing was paid to every library. If not to you, you know better than that. You drove long miles too, and you didn't.
Well,
By the time she came along in the 80s, bless her heart, she volunteered flat out. She just.
Well, see, I thought that was the way it was done. I mean,
Did the trustees do windows?
and Sadie Gow told me that she used to clean the lavatory. And so, yeah.
And Patty Sargent's another one.
Right.
Patty can tell you about her dishpan hands for
Right.
housekeeping.
Right?
During the association years, how was the library financed? Where did the money come from?
Just where I told you.
Did it
Well,
come, membership?
Hobby show, craft show, which we haven't talked about yet.
Did the craft show evolve into what we all know as now
Right.
the library fair?
It was the beginning of it, yes.
First craft show I ever remember was over in Benson Hall.
Right?
And then there was a quilt show held up in the UF Hall, one time. And these were all, I guess you had to pay something to get in, or else the craft show, they required, you bought things. And
The craft people of the island, when I was there, paid a % of their day's sale.
right,
If they sold 2 things, we got a little bit. If they sold 1 thing, we probably didn't get very much.
right.
I do have,
Well, Carol would know about that because she had.
Well, of course,
keep track of-
I come along a lot later in the 1980s when the library fair was
a
a big
fair.
ongoing thing,
And-
and you could raise anywhere from 15 to 25,000, depending on the quality of the white elephants and
Right,
weather and.
right.
Certainly by '79, when I first started, the library fair was well established. And I don't remember exactly what the net was, but it was in the 15 to 18,000 range.
Right.
By the end of the 80s, it got up to 20,000, 22, or something like
Well, Phoebe B. used to run what I would call the trash and treasures
Right.
booth, and she ran that for quite a lot of years. And I know that, I remember the figure that was given to us. Now, this was not the official figure. One year was about 17, and one year was about 22. And they thought that was just magnificent.
Right. It wasn't.
When did the quilt program start?
Well, that was probably Patty Sargent in the early 80s that, well, didn't we find a quilt out here? 73, right? Yeah, 73. And Dennis Cullen won the first quilt, and he had it stored in a barn, along with other things. And the barn caught on fire, and that quilt was the first thing he grabbed, because he said, I would never be able to live in this community.
Gladys, from looking at the old record books, do you have any guess on how much was spent in a year during the beginning years? What was the total budget spent?
Well, I'd just love to lay this out before this crowd tonight. I think that in at least 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, the financial records were never totaled. There was never a balance sheet. There was never anything, like most I see people out here today say, well, we can't do that. But we did that then. We kept careful records of this is spent and that is spent and that is spent. Somehow we never got around or didn't have the people who understood to make a balance sheet, or maybe we just didn't need it. We were not dealing with enough money to anybody get upset about. I'm just noticing here that in 1956, the hobby show made almost $400, and that was our budget for the year. Memberships, pie suppers, so forth. But we also grew real fast, because in '65, the last year I did the show, and incidentally, 3 times out of those 8 years, along with everything else, I did the hobby show, because nobody else wanted to be bothered with it. So that's what the librarian does. She dusted, she cleaned. We didn't have a restroom to clean for several years.
Thank goodness.
But anyway, we grew to make $900 the last year I was there. So you see, as the years progressed, we got more, we always grew, we always developed more. And that's the interesting thing, going back again, the growth of the library and what it means in the community, and people who care, and people who volunteer, and roll up their sleeves and work. And there's always somebody else. There's always another volunteer. There's always somebody else.
But initially, $1,000 to $1,500 would have been a year's budget.
Well, depending on your memberships for $5 each.
Yeah.
And also that $5 covered everybody in the family.
Because we're going to get to
Children.
Victoria with the public library later on this evening, and the growth is astonishing
Right.
at every level in this. Volunteers, everyone was a volunteer in the association,
Oh, yes.
and
Oh, yes.
everything that was done with volunteers.
Right.
Absolutely.
Check out, check in, book
Absolutely.
processing, book
Washing
covering.
the windows, cleaning the floor, dusting the beautiful walls, and that's the way it was. For 8 to 10 years.
So for many years, clear into the 80s, the magazines were all donated subscriptions or issues that people gave us. There was no budget for magazines.
And then when I took over the magazines, why I went around, and some of the people still donate to the library the magazines that I originally
Absolutely.
asked for. But Allen Supply was asked for Fine Home Building, and there were only 2 people that I asked to donate it, 2 businesses that I asked to donate a magazine to the library that refused me.
Oh, yes, they were great.
What were the library hours when you started?
We were open 3 days a week, Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday. Always open on Friday because that was Dr. Heath's day, come to the island, and everybody came to East Sound on Friday. Tuesday, because that's when the school brought busloads to the library. And then Saturday, because of Saturday, and of course you go to town. Exact hours I had a little problem with, but I think it was 11 until 4. Except on Saturday, they stayed open. They opened later, but stayed open longer, because people who worked felt like they were left out. If they worked until 5 o'clock, they couldn't. So I think maybe they stayed open 1 day later than that.
Margaret, what were the hours when you were
Well, I was just sitting here
librarian in the
trying to think. I think we also had, we weren't open on Mondays, or Sunday or Mondays, because we figured, well, everybody got their books on Saturday, they wouldn't be interested until Tuesday or Wednesday. But also, I remember we had an evening, 7 to 9. Yeah.
Thursday.
And I remember George Post was and Bill Westlake were evening librarians, and they worked the desk, and so I think we were Tuesday through Saturday, and we didn't have evening on Saturday, but I think the other times we did. and because we figured that people who worked wouldn't be able to come during the middle of the week.
Did the library do programs when it was the association? Classes, events?
I think it was more the moneymaker thingies. The Christmas tea used to be a big a sale. I mean, people baked cookies and we mixed them up and sold an assortment. Now, of course, now I'm talking the 80s again. I don't know, but I don't think there were programs like you run, for instance, for the children's stuff.
There were poetry readings, I know.
Well, that would, yes, John started that.
Yeah. The
And there was-
80s.
Chantiny.
And there were
Yeah.
children's programs.
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and children's.
right. But not, well, I did start a couple of them. I remember Lynn Roberts did a thingy about identifying the trees on the island, and that was fun because he brought examples and of bark and needles and so on, and that was interesting. And Jack Culver did stuff on what did he do? Mushrooms. That's right, it was mushrooms. And it was through Jack that we got microscopes to use
That
for
was the-
kids. And I started an armchair travelers thing that was quite nice for a while. And people showed their slides and talked about their traveling, and it was a fun program. But, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if one of you could give me a brief snapshot of the development of Orcas at that time, as I'm trying to imagine the library and place it, like what was the population at the time and how it developed to a Seasound?
I think at that point, the figure that sticks in my head is that year-round residents, about 3,000, and
This is
in the
first opening.
summer, and then in the summer it would go up 5 or 6, it was hard to tell. And,
When Margaret was there, it was mid-80s,
Okay.
at about 3,000.
oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
No, no, that's okay. And what about you, Gladys, when it first opened in the mid-50s, 60s?
I hate to guess. I'm very poor about figures. That's why I travel with notes, and that's something I can't answer. Winters were very quiet. One thing that might help, I spoke of being open on Tuesdays because the school would bring the kids from the little ones to the graduating seniors. If I'm not too far off, the graduating seniors that visited our library the first 3 or 4 years were less than 20.
Yeah.
One year, I strictly remember, one year 9 kids came. They wouldn't ride on the bus, of course, they walked. But we had the pleasure, before I left there, of teaching our high school seniors, juniors and seniors, how to use a card catalog, what the Dewey Decimal System was, how your subject area of your card catalog. And now, what do? Now our staff teach them. What do you teach them?
Well, we're calling it the portable librarian, and we have staff going up to the school to teach basic library skills
Well, the,
On the computer.
on the computer.
See, this is my point. I was teaching them subject cards in the card file, and now our staff is teaching our kids how to use the computer to search out their information from finding a single book until, I don't even know what all they're teaching. I'm computer literate myself.
But remarkably similar, simply using a different tool.
Using different tools.
So the school had no library at that time?
Well, if I were to be quoted as saying that outside of this room, I'd probably be in trouble. They had shelves. There was one long room which, in my time, would have been called a study hall, and I don't know what name it was on the high school at that time. But there were shelves across the back of that room, and there was a 3 big dictionaries, and there were books there. But it was not a library. I mean, even as or authentic as the association might have been, compared to what they had at the school, it was pretty good. And I had the pleasure of working with these high school kids, and I still see a high school kid who is now a grown man with his own kids coming to saying, reminding me of the times they came and learned to use a card catalog, and how wonderful it was that Orcas had a library, or they'd have landed on the campus at Western, or wherever it might have been, and they wouldn't have known what a card catalog was for, because there were no card catalogs.
One of the interesting looks at growth in the library is the whole issue, when you talked about the original building being 30 by 40, it's bigger than that now. Over the years, there were, how many remodels or additions done?
3 additions. They remodeled first time about 66, 67, and then you were there for the second one. Carol might have been.
No, it was already done.
It was already done?
It was already done.
Well, Sadie Gow and
Yeah.
what's her name, Ione, remember the
Ione.
Sadie Gow Ione stories?
Yeah.
They did the Breachman room and the Livesey room.
Uh-huh.
And
One was the children's room, then to the west, and one was the workroom thing.
the Breachman room.
Well, the Breachman room was in behind, and then the workroom was added to the east. I mean, the office.
Well,
I want to know when they added the restroom. Was that a separate addition?
They got water. The problem was there was not an east-down water system. And Mrs. Meyer would not give us water. She'd already given us property, and then she gave us additional property because we had so little parking room. So then we asked for water, and she said, thanks, but no thanks. So we had to wait until, I presume, the water company, the East Sound Water System developed. So then we got, and I think it was with the 68, 69 development, which was the Moran room in the middle. You know, the Moran room was in the middle.
Right, okay.
And Breachman was on one side, and Livesey was on the other side. And there was, they didn't actually, let's see, the Breachman room was bigger. And they took a piece off the Breachman room and made an office and a kitchen
Yeah.
and another bathroom. We have only had 2.
You had 2?
One for the public and one for the volunteers.
We got dealt out. We only had 1.
I don't know. My memory
They took it
might
out.
be shot on that.
Oh, I'm sure we only had 1, and it would have been gone. It would have gone with.
Then
the
they took
second.
out the one that was already there. The space
There
was
was
there
just
for it.
1,
It was just one.
and then I think
Yeah.
they made a kitchen out of the other one. Maybe they made a kitchen out of it.
Well, I'm sorry, folks. Margaret and I said
There will be a toilet discussion later.
I want to tell you about
They're
population.
in the book.
About what?
Population?
Yeah, the population, when we came to the island and to move here, to retire here, was,
What year was that?
well, between 1972 and 73, the population, the year-round population on the island was about 2,300,
Okay.
I mean, 2,300 people. And that's, it's somewhere between 72 and 73.
I know if you worked at the library, and this was the big selling point to get volunteers, you would know everybody on the island.
Oh, it's still true.
It's, well, yeah.
We're gonna take a 5-minute break because John Gordon needs to add another tape. We're gonna restart this evening with the question from the floor before we move into the transition, because it's an interesting question that really showcases an interesting difference as we move through the transition. People who are involved in the association have talked about this issue of memberships. You bought a year's membership for $5, or you bought a life's membership for $25. Who could check out books from the library?
Members.
Members. members. And if you weren't a member,
You didn't check out.
it truly was, but most of us, I think, don't remember that it was a private library.
It was a thing
It-
Or a club library.
It was a club.
Yeah.
And the membership was for your family, so if I bought
Yeah.
a $5 membership for the year, it was for my
Everybody.
spouse and my
Yeah.
kids.
And you gave your kids some cards so
Yeah.
that they could bring in.
And by 87, there were 800 members. That was a high water mark.
And
Well,
there was
and don't we
talk.
all remember our number? I was C-166.
That's right.
And we would look to see, you know, if we had read a certain mystery or not, we could just check it very easily. Also, what everybody else was reading.
Well, and also, if you had a book and you knew, like John Chantiny read it, oh, then you will like it.
Then you'll like it,
Or,
right.
oh, this isn't for you, this isn't,
How many cards
and it
does?
was not, it wasn't nasty,
No.
it was helpful.
Oh, it
And you know, we still do it. We look for Dr. Adams' little red mark on the day slip, and okay, this is the kind of thing he would like. Oh, okay, I'll take it out. So, I mean, it was very easy to steer people to the kind of thing they might like.
There have only been about 3 or 4 times that I've thought perhaps I was close to being tarred and feathered. And one of them has been those decisions that resulted in losing your card number, A1s and G4. That was tough. People, that was an identity. And there was a history of that identity in all those books. And to lose that number was really something. So I'm okay so far.
You could tell, you know, you could tell when we're taking out a book, a mystery from Maryland, I could tell that she read it before.
Yeah. That's right.
Right, that's helpful.
Yeah, that's right.
How many cards do we have now? Out.
Well, interestingly, we have over 4,000 cards issued. We actually have more cards issued than there are people on this island. And the reason for that is that the cards live beyond perhaps some of the time that people stay here. If you're here for 3 months in the summer and are participating in our community's life, you get a library card. And it's active. We purge the record every 2 years. So it's a real active card file, a library card file, but there are 4,238 Orcas library cards
Wow.
currently in hand that are active.
And one of the interesting things,
Yeah.
and the whole issue of membership is interesting because there used to be the membership book, and it was all hand done, and you opened it to the Ds, and you got, if you were a D, you got the next D number, and your name was handwritten in.
I have that book is here.
The book is,
Yeah.
yes, it's one of those historical things. The other thing was the overdues that were done on a weekly basis were all hand done. And it would take 3 to 4 hours every week to send overdues.
Well, and I can remember Ireland Norman sitting at the typewriter and typing up the list for us to have at the desk. And if a person had, and this was the really overdue, and you weren't supposed, if you worked at the desk, you weren't supposed to let some of these people out until they brought a book back in. And one of the worst ones was Pat Arndt, who would take, she'd take mountains of books out, and then, I don't know, they get lost under the bed, I don't know where she, and so then we'd finally say, it's time, and she would have to bring in a sack of books. Right.
Well, my
So she could
favorite
check out
remembrance of
every
that was when I first moved here. That list sat on the front desk, but even more amazing, it was in a black framed picture frame. And I thought of it as the black list, and my worst fear was that my name, because they were alphabetically done, would be there on this black list. It was effective.
Right. For some people, it was.
It was very effective. The transition to the public library that we now know was not a quick process. And a number of the people here, well, everybody here, one way or the other, was involved in this transition. I'm curious initially, what led to the discussions about going from a private member only to a public library, and when did they begin?
Well, they began 2 or 3 years beforehand because the amount of money that we could generate with memberships, and there was, a lot of, like this, about upping the membership from $5 to $10. That didn't seem to want to fly. And each year, we could generate about, if we got 20,000 out of the fair, that was wonderful. It was an incredible amount. And each year, the expenses of running, and we would like to keep up with ordering books and magazines and so on and so forth, renewing the collection so that it wasn't the same old books. Finally, we decided that something had to be done to have more money to run the library. And this was still with not very many paid people. And it was Bob Cook on his, and he said, if the library's gonna go down the tube, I don't want it to be on my watch. From the Navy, he just didn't. So we tried to set up an endowment thing, a fund that would generate enough running, interest.
That started several years before.
Beforehand, yeah. And that didn't work. There just was not the money lying around.
The volunteers, also there was burnout.
And I think this
You
was,
know, I
Right.
think this was,
Right?
this was a critical point.
yeah.
It's, I think, moved things along very fast. In the year that they finally decided to move was when Phoebe B, for example, who'd been
Yeah.
doing this magnificent white elephants thing
Yeah.
for, I don't know, 15 years probably, said, no more.
No more,
No
that's
more.
right.
Gotta get somebody else to do it this year. Well, that's crushing when somebody literally spent a couple of months of the year putting together the things that represented a major part of the fair.
And to put this in a time frame for people, the vote to the community to whether to go public or not was in September of 1987. And so a lot of this discussion was 2 or 3 years beforehand. Was it discussed openly in the community, beyond the association board?
Well, we had people letting us know. And it was mainly that people who were the volunteers, and they'd say,
The board at the time, it wasn't just Phoebe.
Yeah, everybody was giving up,
Right.
yeah.
Am I have a remembrance that it was put to some type of vote early that failed flat.
oh no, really?
Well, I'm asking, I'm wrong about that.
Not in the 80s.
Not
public.
Not in the
It wasn't a
80s.
public.
No, not a
It was
public
not
vote,
public,
but
but it might have been an
at an
in-house.
annual meeting, for
Yeah,
instance?
it
at
might have
an
been
annual
an
meeting?
in-house, yeah.
And this is something we haven't touched on,
Yeah.
but annual
Yeah.
meetings,
Well, I have a vague remembrance, I wasn't part of the volunteer, but my husband was very much involved in it. And I remember he would come home after, meetings and stuff, and the general feeling was that people didn't want it to be a tax district. It was the same kind of thing I remember when the hospital tax district always came up. Now, we haven't needed to be a tax district, we haven't needed to ask for taxes, and then people would say, well, you have to be a member to get, to get books. Well, if you can't afford it, there's no way you're not going to get books. And everybody, well, you just tell them you're indigent and they'll certainly give you books. It was this sort of feeling. But the basic thing I remember in that whole time was, we don't want another tax district.
How long did the process take for all of this discussion? 2, 3 years?
About 3.
Well, I know when the thing finally got, the idea was back here, and finally we realized, and shall we have a special election in September to go tax district? And we had coffee clutches, and we went around the island at various times in small groups, talking it up. And so when they did have the special, I'm sure it was a special election, I remember it was in September, and it seemed like we only took about 1 month. It was after the fair, I think.
No,
All right.
it seemed to me there was kind of a Patty Sargent, Sadie Gow, and Carol Erickson. It seemed like those three took on kind of spearheading the drive
For the district.
for the district.
That's what I remember, yeah.
This started in the late spring,
It seemed like it went over the summer.
late spring. And we began having these community meetings to try to reach people during June and July,
Okay.
before the fair.
We're going to a lot of them.
Partly because there was so much planning that had to go into it. Because here's an association, we're gonna try to have a vote. If the vote is to go public, then we are able to get tax money, but that wouldn't come until 2 years later. So what are we gonna do in the meantime? How are we gonna work all this out? What are we gonna do if the association goes out of business because it no longer has a library to manage? Then there was a notion, well, we ought to have a friends organization. How do you do that? What's the relationship of that to the association, to the trustees? And these things were all under consideration, discussed in various groups, all during that summer. So that by the time the vote came, nothing could happen really officially until after the vote occurred. And the vote was taken at the regular September primary election. That was the first election
Okay.
that was coming up. So it was tagged on to that primary election. And then once the vote came out favorably, we had a very short time in which to really get going. So the plans had to all be laid before that.
And the vote was staggering in a way that I think we couldn't imagine now a vote on anything. This community, what is it? 76.5%, yes. For all the talk about we don't want another taxing district and all, when it came down to voting for the library, it was hugely successful.
Well, there was also a lot of talk about if we don't do this, we're not going to have a library. Now, do we really want a library? We don't want anything, and it doesn't matter. So, and I think, I really think that's what did it, when people realized that it really was not going to be a library anymore.
Fred, you
Rachel
were,
is,
Rachel?
I just wanted to say, and I was one of those that was against the taxing district. I don't know how I voted eventually, but I felt that there was going to be a spirit lost in the community. I think there was quite a few volunteers that felt that a volunteer spirit would disappear, and it would be taken over, and people would have a machine like running our library rather than goodwill. And I think there was some of that out there in the public. It was quite a miracle that the vote was so high.
well, the other thing, the other side of that coin was that you would hear some people say, well, of course the library is run by a bunch of elitists. And so, they were sort of an uppity group. Well, we tried not to be, but there was that on the other side, and it proved to be a very small minority. 30%, that's 25.
After the vote in September of '87, what happened? What was next? Because all of a sudden now we've been authorized to have a public library. What happened to the association? What was next?
There was an association meeting. In the meantime, there was discussion about, well, maybe the association could become the Friends. Well, what would that take? Well, when we looked at the bylaws of the association, it didn't take very much, about 10 bylaw changes. And it was a Friends organization. But in order to do that, you had to have so many days notice to the membership. You had to, if you're going to have a changing the bylaws, it had to be a 2/3 vote. You had to be sure to have enough out for a quorum. All that business had to take place. The Articles of Incorporation had to be changed because the association was incorporated under the laws of the state of Washington. That only took a little change too, but it had to go through Olympia. So that had to be done. Then there was the little question of how do you finance the library between the time of the election and the time the money is first available, which is election September '87, first money available April '89. The library fair that summer of '87 did pretty well. It brought in 23,000. But you had to work out a budget for the next year, and where you were going to get the money for that. So I should have said it along the way that one of the things that was helpful to us is we talked to people at Lopez and the people in Friday Harbor and San Juan, because they had both gone through this process at one stage or another, and were very familiar with what kind of help they could get from the State Library Association, which turns out to be massive, really important help. We had representatives from the State Library Association who met with the association people, with those of us who were working on the campaign, to help us have a good campaign, and then how to work out the other details later.
And Fred, you were on a committee that wrote a grant
That's right.
to the state library that also,
That was,
as I recall, was about a $50,000 grant.
54.
50,
54,
okay.
that's right.
That helped during
That was-
1988.
That was a real breakthrough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that had to be done fast.
Peter Stewart
Peter
That's
Stewart
right.
was
Yeah.
was very, I sat on that committee, and Peter Stewart and Fred Cleveland were masters at getting this group to focus on a future that was bigger than any of us could have imagined at that time. They were just stunning.
But there were some people that had the detailed knowledge about how you do a children's library that helped to make that grant ring true for the people in Olympia. And that was the kind of role that Phyllis played on that committee. It was a very hard-working, very effective committee. And of course, in about 3 weeks, we produced this grant proposal. And
Well, and as Phyllis says, it was masterful. It was masterful not only because they got the money, but it was the blueprint for what we were to become. Once, as one of the original 5 trustees then for the library district, we needed to go forward, and here was this blueprint already in place, provided by the grant. So we could just kind of pick up the ball and run with it.
Well, and going from a library fair that generated $20,000 to a state grant of 54, there was a significant jump in that transition year in money available.
But,
But you know, one of the things is we had to pay the librarian, and that's where we had not paid anybody before.
Well, and I remember too that the other thing that stumped us was, it wasn't the wage that the person was, but then you have all the perks that the government Yeah. requires of you. And that really sort of set us back. I mean, it really made me go.
it wasn't hard to get to 56,000 if you figure out professional staff, benefits, support the continued development of the collection, provide training for the trustees and for the staff, ongoing training, recruitment of the librarian,
That was
with
fun.
all the costs that go into that. And then we picked out the one area we wanted to give particular emphasis to, the development of the children's program. And that was the one specific item in the grant that dealt with substance, of what a library is all about. And described what we wanted to do and asked for money to finance those early activities. It was fun to do.
And I just remember the pressure of time and the fact that you guys came through so fast. I mean,
We had a lot of good help.
I wouldn't be able to name you how many months, but in the back of my mind is this pressure of time to get this done, and it was done so fast and so well.
And it was done one morning and needed to be in Olympia that afternoon. And at that point in time, there were no fax machines on Orcas Island. It had to be small boated over to Friday Harbor to the county for the county office to fax it to Olympia. I mean, you ask about a different time on Orcas and no email. I mean, it was a different time.
Well, I mean, Victoria jokes that when she came as our first paid librarian, we had a typewriter and the electric pencil sharpener.
I was impressed by the electric pencil sharpener. They had recently gotten a phone, I think, but you had an electric pencil sharpener. I came from Snow Isle Library with a number of branches, and we all sharpened our pencils.
During this transition year, the association had an endowment. They had some cash into the bank, totaling almost $100,000. They had a building and property that the building sat on. What kind of work did it take to move from that to this public entity?
Well, the key question, first of all, was that what was going to happen to the physical assets of the library. Clearly, they had to go to the new public library, so one of the things the association had to do was to transfer the physical assets of the library, building, books, works, to the district trustees. And then the notion was that the Friends would be created as the inheritor of the spirit of the association, and the money that was in the treasury of the association would go to the Friends for use in support and development of the library. And that was negotiated out during these meetings that were held before the election, so that we would know what we're going to do if the election came out right.
And that was a little hard, I think, for some people to give up ownership of something that they'd worked so long and hard to develop. To all of a sudden just deed it over to this quote-unquote tax district.
And even though the tax district was you all, I mean, the same, a portion, 5 of you all became trustees of the district, and others remained on the association board. You weren't strangers to each other, but still in all, there was a division. That must have been hard.
Yeah. And the money was, I remember that being a touchy issue.
Yeah, it was very touchy.
Yeah.
One thing I think was fortunate in that the association had a very able nominating committee. We asked this nominating committee to look over all the people they might want to look for on the island. We're thinking of a library history, and to come up with a list, 2 lists. One list of people that might be proposed to the association, which in turn then had to propose them to the county commissioners or the 5 trustees. And then another list of people who would make good board members of the Friends, so that there would be a continuity and a transfer, and you wouldn't have to always be reinventing the wheel. And this was a very successful operation. It really worked out very well.
It took about a year, though.
Well, it took.
Yeah, I mean that.
Sure. But it meant that the people and the Friends who had responsibility for now taking care of this money knew something in detail of the history of how
they
it got
knew
there.
about it,
They knew
yeah.
where it came from and how people had worked. Some of them themselves, as members of the association board, had worked hard over the years to build up the endowment.
Well, and it began to address some of the issues that Rachel voiced about losing something when you go public. It helped
Yes,
to deal
it
with
helped
that.
him to deal with that.
Well, we weren't very far out of the hippie times, when you just didn't want the government looking over your shoulder all the time and telling, you know, the big brother thingy. And that was still a holdover feeling. And a lot of people didn't want the government to tell us what kind of books to order. And of course they wouldn't, but it was that feeling, you know, that we weren't going to be our own bosses anymore.
And I'd like to give Doc Bowles quite a bit of credit for getting that money transferred from the Friends Association. Because she got us out to the meetings where they were gonna talk about that transfer, and we were for it. She got all the people that wanted it to be transferred. She was an active.
Yes.
Oh, she was indeed.
Fireball.
And so in January of '88, there was a new district board for the first time.
There was 5 of us. Phyllis was one of the 5, Patty Sargent, Peter Stewart, Bob Lundeen, and myself. And Phyllis maybe did 1 or 2 meetings and then resigned.
So we could hire her.
So she could at least apply.
Yes,
Apply.
right.
And so Phyllis was replaced by Leith Templin. So kind of when I think of the original board, I kind of have a tendency to lose Phyllis. And it was up to the original 5. We hired our first children's librarian in Phyllis and did the interview search along with then a community of friends and some members of the community to find our first librarian.
I think Kathy Lloyd was hired before I came.
She must
You were
have
in
been.
March,
You were in March?
and Kathy was February, March, and I came in May.
Well, and now I wanna come back to something that Rachel raised, this whole issue of losing something as you went. There was a lot of discussion that the whole volunteer structure would go. That once we became public and had paid staff, that it would go. Victoria, you came and started fresh. I mean, you were hired out of the Snow Isle Library District, and you moved here, and here we were. Here you were. What was that like?
Well, sort of like reaching up and realizing the train was already moving. This library has a long life, and the momentum is clear to anyone who enters these doors today. And it certainly was to me then. The community members, as they interviewed candidates, and I think you had 4 or 6 to start, and then maybe narrowed it to
3. I only remember interviewing 3.
That's all.
3 that
I think we had some answers to the ad, but they didn't, some of them didn't come. But 3, I remember, right?
Much of the community discussion with me had to do with those concerns about the community's life in the library and volunteers and what experiences I might bring and the philosophy of service and working with people. And it was really clear, the community's expectations. And I don't know, for my end, when I got on the ferry to go back to the mainland, I felt it was a match and really had my fingers crossed.
Well, you know, it was.
It was.
Excuse me, I haven't said anything for a while, so now I can say it's the best thing that happened to the library district was when that board hired that person.
That person.
That person. No, I was gonna call her executive officer or CEO. I'm not sure her proper title, but it was the best thing that the board did. She was the one that healed the wounds, that put things together, that kept volunteers first, community first, and all the time her professionalism kept us all in line.
Because the volunteers have continued?
I mean, it was real.
Without a break.
It was real obvious, it's like, we can't run this library without our volunteers. And as I recall, that was one of Victoria's,
That's
she
right.
had
I
had
remember that.
volunteer coordination experience with Snow Island.
Right. And
Not that cream
Yeah.
doesn't rise to the top, it did. It was just real obvious from, I can't remember if you were the first interview or the second.
She was the last interview.
The last, I
And
think.
it was just so obvious.
last.
And it was
Yeah.
just, yeah, it was just
Yeah.
like,
So obvious.
So
But
now,
you knew that you were inheriting a going concern.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
absolutely.
really obvious.
yeah,
And there was a lot
When
of
we
care
talked.
taken
Yeah.
to make sure that,
Yeah.
that this new person was successful.
Uh-huh.
Margaret was very careful and guiding and giving, and I knew Gladys was always there, and it continues.
a second right thing the board did. They hired our friend Phyllis. And her first, I think her first appointment was a children's librarian. And did you follow right alongside of that with volunteer coordinator? So between the two of them, they swept all these worn out, tired out, I've had it, volunteers who were just gonna go home and fold their arms and say, well, now what are you gonna do? And the first thing you knew, every single one of us were right back up there.
And the amazing thing in this transition, as a staff member who all of a sudden got a check from the library district, was that everybody was supportive. And if you want to ever see how to do a transition and go from the person in charge, Margaret Philbrick, to just a front desk person overnight, and be supportive, it's this woman. It was a lesson. Victoria was hired in May of '88. In January of '93, we moved books into this
Oh,
building.
that was a fun day.
This was a 4-year process from going public to being here. Anybody have any comments on from there to here, where now we have 3 bathrooms?
We still only have one electric pencil sharpener though.
Well, people don't use pencils anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they do? Good.
But
Well, I think that was a fun, and I was so impressed, because when I came up, are we gonna help? Sure, we're gonna help. And it was so beautifully organized, so that the thing flowed, and you didn't bump into anybody with the boxes of books. It was wonderful it just went so smoothly, I can't believe how, and it was because you had a flow chart, you had it all psyched out, you knew.
You know, the plan that was written, I came in May, and the plan that was written for the state grant that allowed for the funding in 1988, which was, by the way, complemented by an additional $30,000 or so from the Friends of the Library. So our first year's budget was about $80,000. I came in May, and there were deadlines within that grant for June of that year to be done for the new library district. So I, basically, as a new staff member, I had my work plan. Here's what we're going to be doing, and we're thinking about what's coming next, and is this building okay, and is there enough parking, and what about the collection, and all of the questions were there. It was very exciting to come, because you were ready, as always.
That's right.
Yeah.
and it was hard to give up the little old library, but we couldn't go up. We didn't have adequate parking.
The roof was in bad shape.
The roof,
The foundation was
probably. I mean,
It was not.
it was, we didn't have much option but to find a new spot. Short of tearing down and rebuilding there, but even that
Wasn't enough.
wasn't, we weren't gonna come up with adequate parking.
It wasn't feasible.
That was
And
amazing.
so we went from what, 2,300 square feet to our 6,000 that we have here.
How was this building paid for?
By a bunch of things. Right. We had money that came from the Friends of the Library, so we had money that came from the old Library Association. We sold the building. We had a major fundraiser that was supported by a member of the community that did a match, 2 for 1 for every $2 the community put in, he put in 1. We did get a building grant from the state, which was kind of interesting. Victoria and I went to plead our case over in the Spokane area, and we were competing with 2 or 3 other libraries. And it was pretty amazing that they awarded us this grant when we didn't have all of our funding in place. We had this wonderful pie chart, and it said the community needed to come up with $375,000 in donations, and we hadn't reached that point yet. Do you remember when we went? Was it?
You had a bond. You had a bond too.
We did have a bond, yeah. They in essence gave us the grant with a proviso. We had to have the money by October, or we'd lose it to the next one in line.
Oh, that's right.
And we raised the money. And yes, and then the last piece of the puzzle was a general obligation bond. So, and that was a 6-year bond. So basically, when we moved in here, this building, the only mortgage on this building was this $130,000 general obligation bond, which was paid off in 6 years. So,
This seems such a choice spot for the library, this hilltop. How did you luck into finding it at the right time? Was that just easy, or was
no. We looked at a lot of pieces. We were approached by Buck Park. Wouldn't we like to be out there with them? And that was sort of, it wasn't hard to walk away from that. What they offered us, as I recall, was like a 99-year lease, so that we didn't own the property, which would have made us ineligible for the building grant. And we didn't want to be the park's bathroom.
And we wanted to be in the path of the community.
We wanted to be in town. We didn't quite feel comfortable being out there. So we looked at pieces in town, and for those of you that remember, this was the propane business. Had a little gray shack set up here, and kind of a broken asphalt parking lot. So there was probably more than clucking of tongues at our choice of property, because it was a higher profile piece and a more expensive piece.
And at that time seemed quite large. It is still very generous. It's 1.5 acres. But now we're thinking about, as the community needs parking and space, but it's a very beautiful and generous piece of property.
We felt like long-term it was worth the price. So.
As we wrap up this evening, I want to give everybody a chance to respond to 2 questions. Since everyone here has been involved in the library for a long period of time, some longer than others and people here, what's the biggest change in the library since you started to now?
It's a whole lot easier to send out overdues.
Rosalie, what's the biggest change for you?
I think it's what the library itself offers, more than just checking out books, like the Lifelong Learning Project, the programs for the children, access to all the information materials that we have now. I mean, this is a big change It used to be just books and a little program here and there.
Margaret, what's the biggest change for you?
Technology. The things that I fought, the fancy toys, you know, but this is the way the world's going. And I think Victoria was so far-seeing and so diplomatic about getting me to accept the fact that you gotta have those toys. You don't work in today's world unless you have them.
Fred, what about you? Fred is somebody who has worked the front desk for 30 years.
Just as much fun as ever. I think, you know, I have to say, it's because the thing that made me interested in this in the first place hadn't changed. That's the quality of the people. This is my sort of home away from home. This is the kind of thing you do. This is the group of identification. You know, I'm only here 6 months of the year, but wouldn't give up coming back for anything. Partly because it's, well, not partly, all together because it's the people. And in that case, I'm talking about you, talking about all of us, talking about a lot of them who aren't here. And they're, you know, new ones come all the time and they're just as great as the old ones who've left. So it's not, that's not something new, but it's very important.
Kate, what's the biggest change for you?
I don't have to be here every day like I used to.
Because you were when you did magazines, you were here.
That's right, I went every day.
Carol, what's the biggest change for you?
I guess I would echo Margaret's sentiment about technology, to see how much library services kind of have changed, and the big challenge is, hey, you can get it off the internet, why go to the library? Which is what today's trustees and tomorrow's trustees need to think about, until you get back to Fred's point of people. That kind of is, for I think the current library board, our recurring theme is, yes, people can sit at home and download tons of information off their computer. I don't think too many of us here are ready to climb into bed with our laptops or our Palm Pilots to read. I think we still want the comfort of a book. But it's sharing with people, whether it's programming or just being able to come in the front door. It gets back to people.
Victoria, you've been here 13, 14 years. What's the biggest change for you? Yeah, it has been that long. Yeah.
The spirit was in the library, down across from the church, but there wasn't room for the people. And so probably the biggest change that I see is now the spirit came, and the people came, and the books came down the road or up the hill. But now we have more room for people to be here together. When I see Thursday morning 25 people here talking about Russian novels, or a French class, or a covey of people around a computer, or the kids with 49 backpacks, perhaps this physical plant has allowed people to come and stay here together. That would be the biggest change from that place.
Gladys, you've seen the changes for almost 50 years. What's the biggest change for you?
The thing that comes to my mind first can be said in one word, and that's service. When the library opened in 1956, our service was to check out a book for you and check it in when you brought it back. So we're going from down here, that kind of service, to the service that the library gives today, and it's a little hard to think of what service they do not present to the community if the community asks for it. In addition to that, in 1956, we had a staff of 2 people 3 times a week, and myself. And now we've got a staff, and they're amazingly efficient, forever helpful, forever cheerful. And I just have to add one more word, our fabulous Friends of the Library, which we did not have that type of organization at the association. Services, staff, and Friends of the Library, it's a whole new world, and I'm so glad to be a part of it.
Amen.
Amen, yes.
Karen,
I have a question.
Karen is our newest staff
Yes.
member.
Yeah, right.
As a more recent staff member, and maybe this is for Phyllis and Victoria, when you were the first paid staff, who did checkouts? Who did all of that stuff? Was it still mostly volunteers? And then how long did it take for the staff to grow? To now we have what, 7? Do we have 7? That's right. Yeah.
Well, that first year then it was 3 people. I was full-time and Kathy Lloyd, I think, worked 12 or 15 hours, and Phyllis, I'm not sure. And probably 3 years down the road, we added 1 more person. What's your question?
Well, I just wondered, you talked about all that you had to do and all of this transition from the library to over here, and were you also that person standing there checking out? And I mean, who was doing all of this?
Well, the volunteers were.
Yeah.
The interesting thing was, the volunteers never left.
Yeah.
We just added some people who got checks, but the check-in and check-out was volunteer done. Gladys and May still came to mend and process books. Kate came to do magazines. Interlibrary loan was done. Sally Sanders came and filed the endless card catalog cards that had to be still hand done. The volunteers actually grew over the first couple of years. We had more and more and more. As we added more services, we frankly needed more volunteers to do more and more pieces. The volunteer group here on day-to-day became much stronger and bigger as we expanded.
And we're still so dependent on them.
I think the high number was 112. Which just about the time we were ready to move here and before the automated circulation system that did a lot, now does all of the filing and things. And we today are proud of our 80 volunteers. So the number is huge and strong, the number of hours.
Well, I remember making a list to have at one of our annual meetings, and it was over 100. But of course, I was including people that worked on the fair, and the people who helped out in the garden as well.
Well, and that's an interesting point, because when we count our volunteers here, we count the library volunteers. And if you count the friends of the library volunteers, the group is immense, and I think Gladys hit the nail on the head. This friends group has become a very significant moving feature of this library. I can't imagine, as a children's person, doing my job without the support of the Friends of the Library.
Because haven't they funded Story Train and Science Wizard from day one?
They have funded things from day one. The very first grant, there was $400 allocated for children's programming, in a way that a lot of big libraries would have loved to have seen that kind of money.
Well, I have to say too that before we went to tax district, when you'd say, oh, I volunteer at the Orcas Island Library, oh yeah, that's a neat little library. So it has always been oriented to community that, people recognized it as a core in the community. And for a long time it was the big one. It wasn't until later that we got the medical center and the Orcas Center. We didn't, those came along within the 20 years that I know about.
That was, the library was it.
Yeah, that's right. Before we let people go out into the cold, wet this evening, anyone want to talk about why you stayed? Why you
Fun.
stayed volunteering for all these years?
It's fun.
Already have.
Your friend has already talked about that. Anyone else? This is sort of your chance.
Well, I think those of us who think the library's really important to us are willing to give some service. And I think the library is a very important part of a lot of people's lives here. I mean, significant, not just.
Carol, what makes you come back for a second time around the board? A thankless job, listening by son.
I guess it's love of library, this one in particular, but libraries in general. Our library's trustees agenda, one of our very first things is, introduction of guests and things, and library visits is one of the first things that, when you've been out in your travels, have you stopped and visited a library? And when many of us do travel, it is a place to walk into, to feel like you're at home, like what is this community like? And so it's just kind of love of library.
And it's also one of the things included on a questionnaire when teachers who are coming to the island, they want to know if we have a library, and they can answer so affirmatively. Important.
Yes, sir.
May I make a comment? I just want to add a word, as a newcomer to the island, I want to add a word of thanks and blessing, and maybe a sort of a later perspective on the library. My wife and I were first trying to decide to come to the island. One of the things that delighted me when I first looked up here and saw the most beautiful library I'd ever seen was the library, and coming in and just being warmly greeted and just seeing all the resources here. I'm finishing my thesis right now on the island. I hope to stay on Orcas for a long time. We're in a sort of a trial period right now, but in the meantime, I've just been, the resources here, the help I've received from interlibrary loans to working on the computer to just checking out different books has been incredible. And I also wanted to add a little, I think could be an interesting comment for those of you like myself who have concerns about the technology end of things. My thesis is related to technology and some of the changes happening in the world and some concerns that I have. I've chosen just over this last year to not have a computer in my home. And there is a minority population in my generation that's sort of feeling concerns about the place of technology in our life. And I think having technology, these type of tools in community atmospheres where there can still be relationship, where there can be moderation on how much time, so you don't sit in front of the computer all day long, and the content and the way it's used as a tool together is an incredibly needed thing. And so I think actually, while there is a concern maybe of technology having too much of a place in the library, it actually can end up serving against technology having too much of a place in our private lives. So I think that that's been really helpful for me. I don't use the email at home. I can just come here, check my email a couple times a week and get information that I need. So just want to say thank you so much for all that you've done here, and I really enjoy having this library.
Thank you all very much for coming. There are coffee and cookies out there. Don't forget breakfast at 9 tomorrow. Don't forget breakfast at 9 tomorrow. Barbara Wheeler.
Do you belong to the Friends?
Pardon me?
That's a great news, like Barbara.
But I would like to thank everyone who participated in the panel. These people have spent weeks and months thinking back to what I think of as the good old days. I thank you all very, very much. This has been wonderful. Thank you all very much.